Hi, I'm Brian. I'm a mathematician and cyberneticist. I've been doing artificial intelligence for about, 1992, I think, was my first system. So that's really old. But I'm currently working in the healthcare space. I've moved from several different industries. I'm going to talk a little bit about the industries I've been in. But today I want to talk about how healthcare is experiencing a data explosion and how we need to handle that using very advanced methods. Can everybody hear me okay? Because I don't really have a microphone on me, but this poor gentleman can't hear me that well. I'll try to speak up. I'll point the microphone at me. Maybe that'll work a little bit better, come a little bit closer. But I wander around a lot because I'm kind of antsy. Okay, so let's get started, shall we? Stop talking. All right, so for a long time, I've been positioning myself as an expert in machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I have kind of a resume that supports that. When I say it, people don't think I'm lying. However, in preparing for this talk, I realized that I have been lying, because there's an extremely important thing that I've missed my whole life. That's Dinah. That's my dog. And for years, I could not figure out why she wouldn't shut up when the mailman showed up. Right? Like, you get there, the mailman comes up and she starts going, whoa, 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 and starts barking, and you're like, Dinah, shut up, shut up. She has not learned that the mailman's gonna go away. She is looking at the shortest route between approach and retreat. And what I just realized last week, I'm not kidding, and I feel kind of stupid about this, is that this is the path she's learned. She has learned that if she barks, he will retreat. And us in the house going, Dinah, shut up, or really, she's hearing, Dinah, get him, drive him off, right? She thinks that she has a 100% success rate in driving that mailman away from the house. She has never failed in that task. She's pretty confident that she has learned the right path, not realizing that there's a natural path where he's gonna leave anyway. You can barely see the mailman. This guy looks really nice too. But he's gonna leave anyway. And she's never figured that out because she hasn't seen the natural patterns in the data. She has a hypothesis she's walked in with, a solution that she's developed, she's tested, and she's wrong. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my same experience with that. But first I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are and what Deep Six does, my company, to give you some context about why this problem matters to me. We help find patients for clinical trials. And that's probably not a space that you're familiar with. It's a fairly uncommon space. But what we're doing is a pretty important thing. We feel like we're doing a fairly significant, making a significant contribution to healthcare and the overall health of the nation. So what is a clinical trial? Why does it matter? If we're going to hit our cancer research goals every year, we need, for the cancer moonshot, we need to recruit about 6 million patients. So clinical trials are where innovation happens. If you have a new cancer treatment, or if you have a new Crohn's disease treatment, if you're coming in, please sit up front. There's plenty of space here. If you have a new treatment that you want to get to market, that's how you test it, with clinical trials. Somebody has to come out and try out a medicine and see if it works. We need 6 million patients a year to accomplish that task, and we're not hitting it. We are typically 4 million short. That's a huge shortfall. So that means that these life-saving cures that are sitting in laboratories aren't getting out to the public. So when we're slow on the fight against cancer, it's partially because we can't find patients to try it out against. Our company is in that space, and it's an extremely hard problem. So why is it a hard problem? It's a hard problem because patient data is extremely hard to read. You can't really just use the structured fields. The structured fields are things like age, gender, weight, medications. You need a lot more than that in order to find the correct treatment. So for instance, here I have, I'm just going to block it out so you can't see it. It's right here. If you were to see through me, you'd see right there. Or maybe it's on my back. Radiation therapy, incontinence, and frequent urination are signs that people aren't tolerating, for instance, their medication regime very well. And in order to find a trial where they can tolerate better, they need to know that. That doesn't show up in the clinical record. Okay. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay. I was telling Kyle earlier that I have a dad voice, so if like this guy in the back corner was doing something wrong, I'd be able to stop him really quick. Hey, don't do that! With or without the microphone. Anyway, patient data is really, really hard to read. So do I have to do the whole stick again? No. And we're trying to unlock the power of that natural language within the record. So if a physician says something that's important to a particular patient, that can get captured and matched to a clinical trial. So this problem is just going to get worse as we get more and more data sources into the healthcare space. For instance, all of this started with billing data. The reason we have electronic health records is because of billing data. That doesn't help you at all with patient care, right? Laboratory results, ooh, we get the little Y. Laboratory results do help with patient care, but only the physician. They never really make it into the structured data. All of these different data sources are masking the fact that there's information there that cannot be incorporated. Everybody's trying to do it within a data warehouse, but that data warehouse is simply failing. Data warehouses have never accomplished collecting everything. There's been lots of efforts there. They do a good job with some of it, but they won't collect everything. And another problem that's really important is, for instance, many hospitals have remote affiliates. Cedars-Sinai, who we work with specifically, has one in Lake Arrowhead. So the question, does this Brian who showed up at the Lake Arrowhead Hospital also, is that the same Brian who was at the Cedars-Sinai Hospital? That's a hard question to answer. And it can't be done with some simple database matches, right? It doesn't really work that way. And as a matter of fact, what we learned, even more serious, is this Brian who was in the ER yesterday morning the same Brian that was admitted to the hospital last night? Is that the same guy? Like, that problem is still unsolved. And why? Very simple. The nurses don't have time to collect all of your information. They're trying to stop the bleeding. When you come into the emergency room, you've got to be helped. And so they don't collect all of your information specifically. But you'll notice that I put this together in the form of a graph. So if you've known me for any period of time, one of the things you'll know is I have two things I like to say. One is the definition of information is the resolution of uncertainty. You have to have a question in your mind before you can obtain information. And the other one is I have infinite patience to adapt your technology to my problem, with zero patience to adapt my problem to your technology. And I think about this a lot, because I don't want to be going down this path all the time, where I'm conceptualizing, I'm building some ridiculous infrastructure, and I'm executing, right? This happens to me all the time. It's the new sort of cloud-based services haven't made this much easier. It just means you don't have to pay for the hardware the first time. You still have to build out your incredible infrastructure. So trying to get to the closest from conceptualize to execute, I've been thinking about this problem a lot for the last couple of months. I have come to the conclusion that the future is graph analytics in a high-performance context. When I say the future, I don't mean until the heat death of the universe, I mean the next 5 years, right? But everybody says the future, and they mean 5 to 10 years. So for 5 to 10 years, we're going to be looking at graph analytics in a high-performance context. This is the correct technology, but it's not quite ready for us. This slide indicates exactly why this is the correct technology. This over here is the information theory equations. You have to have an idea of uncertainty before you can have a resolution. This is our earliest high-performance computing. I don't remember the name of this one. This, I believe, this was a Cray machine. No, this is not a Cray machine. This is an IBM machine, I believe. This one, right here, click. That guy right there is the chalkboard scene from Good Will Hunting, which is a notorious scene. Does anybody know why it's notorious? Because the problem put up on the chalkboard was ridiculously easy. Ridiculously easy. The people who know graph theory solved that at the time it was on the screen, right, which was like 3 seconds. And so the producers were fooled into something that looked hard to them, actually being ridiculously easy. And I feel like that's the situation we are in today. When we look at anybody know what this one is? This is a representation of the perceptron. The perceptron was invented in, 1956? And it's represented as a graph with nodes between a graph, right? So your natural thinking process is in a graph. And your natural thinking process is to be terrified by things that look obscure. But we need to get past that. And our future is using high-performance computing to help these problems. So we've gotten a lot of attention, my company's gotten a lot of attention lately, partially because we are a graph company. But to a lot of companies, that means putting things into a graph database. We think there are 3 pillars to this. The first one is you have to have a graph database. You have to be doing graph analytics, which means things that take advantage of the interconnectedness of your components. And you have to have some sort of graph processing system. I've been using iGraph a lot lately, which is a pretty great system. I'm building another one, which I'm hoping will actually be a little bit better. So let's actually get into some of the analysis. When you decide, if you decide foolishly to follow us along the graph analytics in an HPC context, I say if you follow us, don't follow too close, you make a lot of stops, turn around and go oops. But when you're out there and you're hearing about these use cases, the first thing you see is the same 3 use cases, and they all come down to like friend of a friend. Commercial graph systems, in terms of commercial graph implementations, are extremely simple, but the academic ones can be extremely advanced, and they can pull out things as deep as like quantum chemistry and crystallography. We actually are using techniques now at Deep 6, and I'm going to show you one in a second, techniques now around the idea of graph entropic methods, which pull from quantum information. Now, there's a reason that this sort of thing always shows up. I was the director of research at MySpace for a number of years, and we were very interested in the friends of our friends analysis, which is naturally a graph problem, but the graph technology wasn't ready for us at that point. So I also did some work with the US intelligence community, all the people in the trench coats, and they were always interested in connections or hidden connections between actors. And so, for instance, there's this notion of a mole. We're going to overuse the term mole today. So everybody knows what a mole is. That's somebody who is basically a spy who has infiltrated your organization. And if you're looking at this red dot and you're concerned whether or not this person is a mole, you look at the one dot and you say, okay, this person's not a mole. Well, I went too far. You have this first connection does not indicate that this person's a mole. If this is another person they know Joe in accounting. They know Betty in finance. Finance and accounting, I don't know, they're different. And they know, Stephen in HR. Until they get into this subsystem of the graph of that network that contains an external agent that you did not see with your initial analysis and doesn't immediately link to your first person, not until you get to the friends and friends, can you identify that this person is part of a larger network that's probably nefarious. So the hidden correlation structure is the most important part. And luckily for us, things like algebraic graph theory and a lot of quantum chemistry allow us to explore structures within graphs at a very sophisticated level, much more sophisticated than the stuff you're reading about in the blogs. Here's an example of how we do disambiguation of natural language by using a graph context. Some of these edges are black, and those are lexically related, like the word mole and the word mole. Lexically related, they're the same term. Some of these are semantically related, like the word mole for discoloration, and malignant neoplasm, which is an indication of cancer. A neoplasm is a cancerous cell. So, and some of them are lexically, and this one is lexically related to Lyme disease, because mole as a rodent is a disease vector. So the context under which you're studying this token, this lexical element, mole, it can vary between like epidemiology or cancer studies. And the only way you know is by looking at the context of what are the edges around them. So when you add these additional edges, like we've been experimenting with, user labels, this label makes sense in this context, this label does not make sense in this context. Adding those labels actually reduces the entropy of the crystal that these graphs create. And in doing that, you're having a more stable structure. And the hypothesis is, and it's not been proven academically yet, but it is proving out in our research, that by reducing the entropy, you get a more informative crystal. The crystal is more predictive. So I've been talking, I think I'm okay on time, talking about why graphs are important, these reductions of entropic structures. Why is HPC important? HPC, of course, has been around for a long time. HPC has been doing high-performance computing lots and lots of things very, very quickly for over 50 years. So the good news is, I said we have graphs in an HPC context. The good news is the HPC community has 50 years of experience in what we're doing. Bad news is they don't care about your problem. They couldn't care less what you think. Part of it is that, for instance, HPC is a very academic endeavor. People get their PhD thesis off how many flops they can get out of their system, and there's tons of bragging rights to be like the fastest machine out there. And for decades, for 40 years, Cray was the top, and now there are multiple companies who are in the top 10 fastest machines. Who gives a shit if they're the fastest machine? I don't. I have a problem I'm trying to solve. I'm trying to do a massive amount of compute. I don't care if it's that, if it's 3 flops slower, right? I don't even care if it's an order of magnitude slower. But unfortunately, that's the only thing that most of the HPC community is focused on, is how fast can they be. And they have this crushing legacy. They have 50 years of stuff to support, right? If they've been doing the National Weather Service compute for 50 years now. If you change anything, all of their models fall apart. So things like OpenMPI or MPI and Fortran are too embedded to be able to change in a reasonable way. And my favorite illustration of this is LAPACK. And if you don't know what LAPACK is the gold standard of parallel compute. Right? People don't hear about it now because everybody's paying attention to the big cloud stuff, but LAPACK is the gold standard. It is today, it has been for 30-something years, maybe longer, the fastest set of routines for distributed linear algebra out there. There's nothing faster, and it's written in Fortran. But this screenshot of the LAPACK homepage, the official LAPACK homepage, was taken this week. That's how much they care about what we think of them. I mean, look at how ugly that screen is, right? That's why they, hey, we're LAPACK, we're Fortran, we're so fast, you will come to us and kiss our ring. Luckily, there is one guy named Jonathan Dorsey who has been a serious advocate for user rights. He's a champion trying to bring HPC into the 21st century. And he's actually having some great success at Cray. And I'm going to do a talk on that probably later this year about how Cray is trying to pivot, like all of these big machines are trying to pivot into the artificial intelligence world. But he's doing a lot of work trying to popularize HPC and bring it back to us using a language called Checkle, which is fantastic. I don't have a slide on that one because it's a little too early. So why is HPC at the intersection of this graph, these graph analytics? Well, it's not hard to imagine that you can turn any graph into a massive sparse matrix. This graph here is a representation of this matrix is a representation of this graph. And if you can see the connectors here, we have directed arrows between A and E and E and B. And if I'm looking at this matrix here, I have a connection between A and B. But if I take the polynomial of this matrix, which I can do now because it's a matrix, not a graph anymore, I take x squared and I get the number of length 2 paths between A and B. So if I square this matrix, this is going to be 1 as well because there's one length 2 path between A and B. And the connections between F and G will suddenly become 0, but there will be a connection between F and D, a length 2 path. Right? I'm hitting that kind of hard because the linear algebra aspect of graph analysis is enormous. A lot of it is focused around graphs, a lot of the graphs are focused around linear algebra. And when I do this, I can turn anything that I can do in linear algebra into a graph problem can now be addressed by all the linear algebra, like principal components analysis, spectral decomposition, eigenspace analysis. So our problem at Team 6 is one of massive matrices. And your problem, as you walk into this, is going to be one of massive matrices, as you see that the graphs are taking hold and that the compute is just failing. We have, in one client alone, we have 5 million patients, and that corresponds to about 5 billion edges, 5 billion entries in our massive matrix that has 173 entries per side. The sparsity is ridiculous. It's much, 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 much less than 1% populated, but it still is a matrix that we have to compute. Within the year, we expect to have 110 million patients under our purview, which is going to be 110 billion edges. Now, I know we talk about billions, we're talking about, TensorFlow can handle billions of events. That's actually more marketing than fact. And the analysis that you want to do, if it's non-trivial, if it's not just run through a convolutional neural network, cannot be accomplished under the current stacks. So what do we do now? Our problem is that the old tools that actually work at this scale and at this speed are outdated. They're not interested in our current problems. Fortran, if you've never programmed in Fortran and you're an analyst, Fortran is like one of the most satisfying programming experiences you can have. I don't recommend you learn it now. It's too esoteric, nobody's using it, but it's extremely satisfying. There is another language called Chapel, which I bring up several times because I feel like it's the new Fortran. It's just as fast, and it's just as sort of intuitive to a mathematician. But those things are outdated. They don't have methods to allow us to interact in the way we're accustomed to interacting. And the new tools are simply inadequate. I don't want to go into why I don't like the whole NoSQL movement. I think there's value there, but there's not value to me, and that's the important part. TensorFlow and Spark, they fail at very important parts. They're extremely important. They may work for other people, but for me, they fail. So I'm happy to kind of go into why that's true. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to avoid my same mistake. I'm trying to say, hey, I have an idea. I'm going to build this massive NoSQL infrastructure. I'm going to build a massive infrastructure, go rent a bunch of huge machines from Amazon, and not be able to execute. What I really want to do is go straight from my graph problem and use HPC to get to my execution phase. I have some good experiments with that. Probably later this year or early next year we'll do a talk on that. But the problem, of course, is these things aren't ready. The problem is we haven't learned enough from our HPC history. We have 50 years of history to draw on. So if you're going to follow me into this sort of nebulous place, which I encourage you to do, or follow yourself into that nebulous place, if you're going to enter that nebulous place of high-performance computing with graphs, you've got a lot of history to learn. We have to learn it, and we have to re-educate ourselves in terms of what does it mean to do massive compute. And that means we got a lot of studying to do. So with that, I'm going to say thank you and get cracking on the books.
Yeah, we do.
Any questions? Sir? I'm not catching all your questions, so actually. So you said in the expression analysis, right?
Yeah, so like in the co-expression analysis, the G expression, like if you set a pretty high threshold, it's fine. You lose some information, but you find also critical information. In your case, it's about the patient, so you don't want to lose any information. I was wondering, like, if for network analysis, how do you actually deal with a different weighted, like networking, and how do you set up this threshold?
Right. So the weights in a network, the weights in a network are going to be also sort of varying, right? Like I showed a bunch of zeros and ones. I showed a binary matrix, but you can do all of this stuff with weighted matrices with real entries. So a lot of that comes down to the art of doing the science. Like, what does it mean to have a relationship between A and B? So in things like network analysis, and I'm assuming you mean like standard like network topology, like this machine, this IP talks about IP. When we were working in the intelligence community, our primary metric was number of messages sent back and forth, and then normalized between those. So, if you send 100 messages, if we send 100 messages back and forth, and I send 10 messages back and forth, you are 10 times more important you're 10 times more important than this person who's not even paying attention, so you're already more important. So, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rude. But how do you do the correct thresholding? Well, the statistical descriptions of what the edge weights should be is an important part of your pre-analysis. So, when I typically use the empirical cumulative distribution function, the ECDF, to find the bottom 95%. Now I find that there's not really a lot of science there. There's more art, just from my years in sort of traditional statistics. And actually doing that just last week cleaned up a lot of my data to eliminate false positives. I don't want to say, hey, because you always get like, what I found out? That he pings localhost every time. Localhost is the most important thing, So you want to make sure that you take the sort of trivial immediate network out of the equation, and the ECDF is a pretty good way to do that. Any other questions? Right over here. Yes, sir.
Yes, Brian. So I want to use graph technology. Graph technology has been around for quite a while. So what do you think? What is the main obstacle for developing? So comparing to like relational databases and traditional approach. So probably it can provide quicker and more rich insights. What is the biggest obstacle? I don't know, maybe talent, understanding business context, or manual modeling of the graph that it can provide insights. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if I know the biggest obstacle, but I'll tell you the ones that I've seen and that seem serious. One is talent. One is that really Neo4j is the only real player out there to be a graph database. Right? There's others out there that are fine, but Neo4j And it's only been around since like, what, 2004, I have it on my slide, it's like about 10 years old. So one of the things that relational databases like Postgres have is that they have decades of history, which means the talent to monitor them is out there. The gotchas around running a relational database are well understood. So that sort of ecosystem around graph database is fairly thin. It's one major vendor, and not a lot of people understand how to use it, so they don't know how to translate their problems into graph structures yet. And also because they're a lot more fluid, you can have a lot more problems with the graph database because you don't have to normalize the tables and such like. I think from a development deployment standpoint, those things are going to continue to be a problem for a while. But as more people use it, there'll be more players and more expertise.
Yeah, we all in graph database in Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah, you're already, I mean, like your data's in there, and I'm not sure if you work at Facebook, but yeah, my friends who work there have used a lot of graph structures, and I know that they developed internally their own graph structure for a while, and they're looking around for commercial solutions, because honestly, maintaining your own graph databases is not a smart business decision, you know? You want the community to help out. Do we have time for more? Yes, sir.
So I want to talk about one of the problems that happen in healthcare is the data is crossed. Like the patient A, he would be with one system, the data is in different systems, and the problem is trying to get the data out of different systems. We need to do the graph analytics. How do you tackle that problem?
Yeah. So one of the things that the promise of a graph database is the sort of schemaless structure. So if you decide all of a sudden you need to collect shoe size, it goes right into a graph database. It's not like a traditional database. One of the problems we're facing is that we're dealing with natural language, and there is no sort of predefined method interface to how you deal with capturing natural language information. It's too complicated. So there is a lot of ETL that will go in. I mean, part of the No SQL movement that I feel was frustrating was that it was all kicking the can down the road. Hey, we're going to throw everything in Hadoop, and look, you can store it. You can store everything, but you can't retrieve anything because nobody's thought about the data on the way in. So they're making the analysts think about it on the way out. So you're still going to have that problem, but as the culture develops around it, people realize that just because it says schemaless doesn't mean there's no ETL. I think that problem will reduce a bit, and I think technologies like FHIR will help a bit, but it's too limited in scope in terms of the kind of information it wants to transmit. So if you don't know about FHIR, I'm happy to talk about that at some point. But that's a fairly deep conversation about data transfer within the healthcare industry. Do we have time for more questions? We have this one here. I don't want to impinge upon the next speaker.
Great. So I'm a research scientist at a research institute in the biomedical field, and I was very interested in the matrices part. Say we have access to years of medical insurance history for 50 millions of Americans, and we're actually trying to build that multidimensional matrix. What will the commercial solution be like, in your opinion?
So the thing with like insurance data is it's also it's fairly structured. So you can probably live in a relational database for a long time. However, the analytics you're going to want to do are much more relationship oriented, right? Like relational database is sort of a misnomer because you get a key and you get a vector, a key and a vector. As opposed to a graph database, you have an object and another object, you have those relationships between them. So when you want to ask, like, is this person similar to that person, or is this person was billed this much for this operation? Is that a statistical anomaly? So you can do that okay in a relational database. However, making that outer join of basically here are all my patients, outer join it to all other patients via this cost metric is extraordinarily expensive. One of the big advantages of graph database is that those traversals, which are basically self-joins in a relational database, are much quicker. So I think that if you are able to come up with a model that says patient, operation, and put on the edge the billing cost, you're going to be able to reduce the actual size and footprint of that data considerably, and be able to do that traversal really quickly. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if I hit your question. Okay. And again, I don't want to impinge on the next speaker, but if we have time for more questions, if I tried to go faster, we would. Okay. Do we have time?
Yes, we do. Any other questions? We do have a bit of time.
They're fine. I was so clear, only did 3 questions. All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.